My name's Phyllis Moscovitch, and I got involved in Federation in the early 80s. I had been very active with the Jewish Community Center in the few years prior to that, and it was a natural progression to get involved with the newly formed Federation. My prime role with Federation was, as I became an executive member, was the Vice President of Leadership Development. And the two most memorable and important things in my estimation that I was involved in were young leadership development, and also I got very involved in missions to Israel and other places.
Okay. Talk to us a little bit about young leadership, because that's certainly a challenge in the community today, too.
Well, it was, for me, definitely one of the highlights. Early on, at the very early days of Federation, we obviously recognized the need for recruiting and retaining leaders, and recruiting became a focus of ours. And when I say ours, we were a pretty small group in those days. So we looked at outreach and way to reach out to young people. Starting, I think the first thing I was involved in was a young women's division that we created, and that was done in a very creative way. I think we invited, with the help of a couple of young women in the community, we amassed a list of about 40 young women and invited them to an event which we called Come Play Jewish Geography. And I remember it so vividly because about 40 women came. There were women from Mexico, there were women from South America, there were women from South Africa, and many other places. And to this day, those women, many of them are the leaders of our community. So in hindsight, it was an important thing, and at this time, I can say it was certainly time and money well spent.
Great. You mentioned missions as well.
Mm-hmm.
Any particular missions that stand out for you amongst the various ones?
Probably the mission to Russia. Well, no, I have to say the first one we went on was to Poland, mm-hmm. and that was life-changing. It was something I didn't really want to do because I didn't think it was something I wanted to have in my life, and in retrospect, it was a life-changing experience in so many ways. I mean, in the obvious ways of memory and going back and bearing witness to the history, but also just the community that was built in that group of 40 of us that went on that trip, and the subsequent connections and commitment that we felt after that experience. So Poland, I would say, was the first and certainly pivotal. The Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, was huge. It put faces to the realities that we have been dealing with and supporting through our work at Federation. We went to Morocco, but these were all pre-Israel trips. We started with a country where the Jews were endangered or struggling, and supported by our work, and then we would go on to Israel to follow through on those experiences that we learned about and see how the new immigrants and the work that was being done in Israel was carried out.
Right.
So Morocco was another fascinating thing to see, a once huge community that was dwindling and everybody was leaving. But then when we went to Israel and saw that whole Sephardic population in Israel and how they were adjusting and not adjusting and the struggles that they had, but the infrastructure that was supporting the work that was done was pretty special. Yeah. I think educating the community was probably a prime focus back in those days. I think people are doing a great job of that today. I think we've come a long way in reaching out and getting the word out and helping people to understand what the work that Federation does and the need for the work that they do both locally and overseas. Okay. So I would say if that would probably be, to me, that was the biggest challenge back then, was education.
Any particular achievements or feats that stand out for you in your involvement?
Well, I would go back to those two issues that I mentioned earlier. The bringing in the new leaders, I would say, was huge for me. I mean, for me, it was hugely gratifying. It was also very, on a personal level, it was gratifying. I got to meet all these wonderful people that cared enough to become connected and involved, and then to watch their development and to see them today as the leaders of the community.
Right.
So that was huge. We did some, it morphed from this first outreach program into some really good leadership development programs that many of them took part in. So that would be one. And I guess, and also the missions. I mean, I think it's hard if you haven't been on one. It's hard to imagine what an important experience it is. We took a person who was an Israeli who said to me the first day, "What am I doing here? I know this country." And at the end she said, "Whoa, I've never been behind the scenes. I've never seen that aspect of the society." So I would say both of those were huge, and they come back to the story of education.
Yeah. You mentioned the Young Leadership Program, which it's certainly an ongoing need and something that's cultivated today too through a group called Access. I'm just curious, back in the early '80s, how did you define young back then? What was that kind of age group? I'm wondering if it's the same as today.
I would say that our focus and our energies went to the 25 to 35-year-olds. So I don't think there's been a big change there.
Right.
There was always talk of the slightly younger cohort, but we felt if we only had so many resources to put into it, the slightly older group was getting more settled, probably more settled today, the 25-year-olds. Then than they are today.
Right.
So we put our energies into that group. I think I recognize it still is a challenge today, but I think that the work the Federation is doing is clearly becoming more focused to that reality and reaching out to those outlying communities. Not just Federation. I think all the institutions are doing a great job of opening their doors and opening their arms to people on the fringe and letting them know that we're all there for them.
Yeah.
So still always probably will be a challenge, but I'm happy to see that that's become a real focus in the
Great.
recent years.
Why do you think supporting Federation is important?
Because I see the faces of the people I saw in Israel that are supported through the overseas dollars that go there. I grew up in the beneficiary world here, particularly with the center, and saw the struggles of doing the on-ground work, doing the hands-on work with people that the institutions here had. So I can't overestimate at all the need and the ongoing need to have a central organization that reinforces the good work that's done on the ground by so many institutions here and overseas. The one thing that I could say to you is that I'm astounded at how good it was for me as an individual to get involved as a volunteer. I was a young mother at home and we had chosen for me to be a stay-at-home mom back in the day, which isn't a luxury that everybody can afford. But I needed something to do. I needed to feel useful outside of my home. And for me, I gained so much. I never would have imagined how much I learned and how much I gained, from the beginning of, budgeting for a major organization to working with people and nurturing people and working on a board of directors. And I actually did a small stint as the interim director of the JCC back in the day. So I sat on the other side of the desk in those days. So I learned about the dynamic of being the beneficiary in a real sense. So yeah, personal gratification was a big bonus for me, and growth and learning.